Okay, I'm going to have to move sort of quickly through this, but I'm going to try to cover our lesson for Tuesday because I'm not going to be here on Tuesday. I'm recording this Monday. I'm going to also record lessons for Wednesday and Thursday as well, since you have to do reading assignments and checkpoints on those days. But for today, we're going to discuss 5.12 Strategies for Victory, Part 2. It's not a very long lesson. You're not going to have to read too much. So, today in history, I did think this was kind of fun, so I included a lot of French stuff just because a lot of French history happened on December 2nd for whatever reason. Napoleon was emperor. He was crowned emperor. He crowned himself, by the way, and based on his outfit, he looks like he was pretty sure of himself. And then also a year later, he won his most famous battle. He defeated two armies at once by himself with his army, but impressive victory, defeating both Russian and Austrian forces, led by kings, by the way. So it wasn't like it was some small force, it was the main forces he beat. And then also in 1852, another French empire was proclaimed by a distant relative of the Napoleon we've all heard of, who went by Napoleon III, and his reign lasts about 20 years, and he eventually gets kicked off, and that's it for kings in France. This is the last one they're going to have. And in American history, about abolitionist John Brown is executed for treason. It's a big story you'll learn about maybe more next year in class. All right, let's move forward. Again, this is for Tuesday, so you can see you have a checkpoint due, and you have to do this lesson. The main goal of today's lesson is to explain why Hitler's plans in Germany ultimately failed. By the end of the week, the war will be over. We'll talk about victory, and then the rest of this unit is going to be on like what happens after World War II. Such a huge war in history. Things are ultimately going to change. All right, before we get into Hitler, the one thing I'll mention is that we do have rationing. This was a question on yesterday's or today's checkpoint. Rationing is it takes place in every country that was involved in the war. The United States had rationing. And the reason why you would ration, which is you're only allowing your citizens, the people at home, to use so much of certain resources, is because they were directing all resources toward the war effort. So people might be restricted to not have meat. We needed meat for the troops overseas. Maybe restrict the amount of coffee you're drinking, the amount of sugar you're eating. So we need these for the war effort. And actually, during World War II, American troops were the best paid troops in the world, the best fed troops in the world. Generally, they had the best conditions of all the armies that were fighting. American troops had it best. I know it's war and it doesn't mean it was easy by any means, but in terms of resources, America did a great job of pooling their resources together with things like this. So rationing was big. Throughout the entire war, Americans had ration card books, and they were allowed to buy so much per week, and they had to come back, get a new ration thing, and be in. You're not just giving tickets away, you're also paying, but you get the point. You have to have one of these tickets, or else you can't get sugar. So if you've used up all of your sugar rations for the week, well, come back next week. All right. And so the answer to this is that rationing, if you get a question, is that it limits the number of goods individuals are allowed to purchase. Okay, let's talk about the bulk of our lesson. Hitler's plans and their failure. So Hitler had ambitious plans. He clearly was a person that wanted to expand his empire. This is where we do a thing in history where we take a person and we boil them down to like one thing. Hitler was evil and the Holocaust was found. Yeah, but that's not getting 365-degree view of the person you're studying. What were Hitler's ambitions? Does anybody really think about that? He wants to grow a huge empire. Yes, he wants to eliminate his enemies, which includes far, far more many groups than just Jewish people living in Eastern Europe. He also hated communists. He wanted to get rid of the people living in Eastern Europe because he needed room for German people to move in there. So he's got all these ambitions. He wants to dominate Europe. He's not unlike other conquerors in the past in this way, in this way. But he fails. Why? Well, one thing Hitler does is he overextends his military. It's one country. He thinks he's going to be able to move in after he's taken over France and he has to keep France. So he's got to leave troops there. You can't just take over a country and say, well, I'll be back later. So he's got troops in France. He has troops in the northern countries he's taken over, like Netherlands and Belgium. And he's moved troops into places like Poland and the East. And now he invades the Soviet Union. Well, after a while, your military supplies are going to run thin. You're not going to have the resources you need. You have to feed huge armies. You have to clothe huge armies. You have to be able to give them gasoline, weapons. All these things have to be built, supplied to the troops constantly. They have to eat every day. Think about that. Got an army of 1 million men in one area. They need food every day. Their horses need food, and there were still horses in World War II that were used. Okay, so the invasion of the Soviet Union was a huge mistake by Hitler in terms of spending a lot of resources that, frankly, I don't think he really had. Another thing that was out of Hitler's control was that his foes, his enemies, were a good unified force. The Allies were really allies. They met together, they spoke. Yes, Joseph Stalin is not the kind of ally you'd probably pick. He's a totalitarian dictator. He killed many of his own people. But during this war, they worked as an allied group. They did work together as best they could, and it makes a difference. Look at the D-Day invasion. Talked about that yesterday. A huge success. And the D-Day invasion required the Americans and the British, especially, to work together. They need to be able to work together. There's American generals in charge of British generals. You have to be able to work together as a team for something like that to work. So, okay. And then Hitler's ideology. So let's talk about the parts of Hitler that are we probably know most about, right? We know about his principles of racial superiority, extreme nationalism, his hatred for Jewish people, his hatred for all these separate groups. But what happens is that countries don't like those policies, so they're not going to join him very easily or willingly. You're not going to become an ally with somebody who wants to commit and openly says he's going to commit, some sort of genocide. Hitler's vague about it in Mein Kampf and other things, but eventually we know about the Holocaust. He's not going to get a lot of allies. Look at the countries on the map here. The red countries, those are his allies. Or they were conquered by one of his allies, like Libya in Africa and Ethiopia in Africa. The other places, the Japanese conquered these parts of China you see here, so that's not really an ally. They're conquered. Japan's an ally, Italy's an ally, and he's got a few in Europe, and for some reason, Thailand is an ally over in Asia. Other than that, Hitler is fighting all the blue countries. If it's dark blue, that means it's an allied power. If it's light blue, it means it's an allied power uh, leaning that way. Maybe this map is showing you before America gets in the war. But the blue countries are allies. The gray countries are neutral. They're not involved in any way whatsoever. So Hitler's policies actually turned off other countries that may have joined him for other reasons. And then we'll get down to late stage Adolf Hitler. I think Adolf Hitler at the beginning of the war made good choices, listened to his generals. This is when it comes to fighting. That's all I'm talking about. Not a fan of Adolf Hitler, clearly. But he made good choices at the beginning of the war, won a lot of battles, defeating France's high water mark of his career. By the end, he just he had health issues. We know Hitler had health issues, and he was possibly addicted to drugs that were prescribed to him by a doctor who probably was overprescribing him. So he starts to make mistakes. He stops listening to his generals. One thing Hitler does, which is a huge mistake, is he fires his generals that have been there for a while and replaces them with yes men. So people that'll just be like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Well, when you're in the middle of a war and you're making these decisions and these huge mistakes, troops are getting captured, people are getting killed. It has a lot of consequences. So Hitler's decision making problems really hurt him in the long run as well. Okay, a checkpoint review. Who commanded the cross-channel invasion of Normandy to open a second Western Front in Europe? This was Eisenhower. I mentioned this earlier about teamwork. Eisenhower is a team player. He is 100%. Even there's a not Rommel, Montgomery was a famously hard to get along with British general. He Montgomery had many fights with about Patton. They didn't like each other, but they all kind of liked Eisenhower, and that was big. They didn't agree with him all the time. I'm sure they had problems with him, but as a leader goes, he was good at getting the team together to be on the same page, and that was very important. What is D-Day? This is the day the Allies launched a massive assault on Nazi occupied France. Remember, when we say Nazi, we mean at this time Germany. Germans were run, or the Nazi party was in power in Germany at the time. Okay. What geographical factor added to German losses at Stalingrad? So in this case, it's harsh winter. This was a question I think I even asked earlier, but the winters in Russia are just brutal. It's nothing like we have here, especially back then. Actually, during World War II, there were some of the worst winters Europe had experienced, like in 1944, which makes it even worse. It's like you're also there during a really bad winter. Okay. And the Battle of Stalingrad is the one you need to remember from the Eastern European fight. That is the battle. That was the turning point in the war. The Soviets won that battle, the Germans lost, and from that point forward, Germany was done attacking. They were now defending. Germany's going to slowly move back closer to Germany, to their own home country, and by the way, the Soviets are just coming. They're not getting smaller. Their army keeps getting bigger. I did talk about this earlier, but I should have reminded you guys. The Soviet Union has an inexhaustible amount of men. They have way more people living in the Soviet Union than Germany does. They can replace their troops. At the beginning of the war, the Soviets have armies of like around 1 million men who are surrendering, gone. You think that would normally, if 1 million men surrender, you'd probably be in trouble. But the Soviets can replace them. They can keep replacing. It's a huge, vast empire. And another reason why Hitler made a mistake attacking them without a plan better than, I think they'll fall apart if we attack them. That was kind of Hitler's thought. And I love this last picture. I should have included it earlier in class, but there's some D-Day veterans sitting across from themselves with the magic of cameras, and a plane that dropped them from Normandy. So this is the version of them on the other side. I think that's great. So we still have World War II veterans alive with us. All of them are probably over 100. My great uncle served in World War II. He just died last year at 96. So they're still around. If you have one in your family or in your life, make sure you talk to them now. Get some stories out of them. All right, guys. See you for the next one.